Welcome to Twist of Revenge, a place where we share stories that don't just entertain but touch the soul. If stories about family, love, mistakes, and second chances mean something to you, then you're in the right place. Consider subscribing, not just to follow the stories, but to remind yourself you're not alone in the complexities of family. Today's story is titled, "I laughed at my dad for being the janitor at my school until I found out he was doing it to pay for my little sister's hospital bills." Let's begin with Chapter 1. Chapter 1, The Man Who Embarrassed Me. When you're 17, you think you know everything. You think you've figured out the world, that your opinions are truth and that your feelings are facts. I thought I was better than my dad. His name is Thomas. Just Thomas, not Dad to my friends, not Sir to anyone, just Thomas. He's the kind of man who wears the same flannel jacket every winter, no matter how many holes it collects. He mends things instead of buying new ones. He smells faintly of coffee and floor cleaner, and he carries a quiet in him that sometimes feels heavier than noise. He raised me on his own, no mother in the picture. She left when I was 5, too young to remember her perfume, but just old enough to remember the sound of the door closing. Since then, it was just us, me, and him. Thomas was never flashy, never loud. He didn't boast about things like other kids' parents did. He never came to school events with expensive watches or leather shoes. He drove a rusted-out Ford pickup and always parked in the back of the lot. I didn't know why then. I just knew I didn't want to be seen with him. It's funny how shame can creep into a child's heart, not because a parent has done something wrong, but because the world has convinced you they should be more polished, more professional, more someone else. At school, I never talked about him. My friends had fathers who were lawyers, doctors, engineers. One guy's dad ran a chain of restaurants and donated benches with his name carved into them for the school courtyard. My dad was what? I didn't even know. Really, he worked odd jobs, I knew that much. He'd leave early, come back late, hands stained with grease or paint or dirt. Sometimes his eyes were so tired they looked bruised. He'd smile anyway, and I'd barely say hello. I spent most mornings rushing out the door, headphones in, avoiding eye contact like it was some kind of disease. If guilt was a storm cloud, I lived under it and just refused to look up. Then came that day. The day I saw him, bucket in one hand, mop in the other, at school. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a coincidence. My dad was the janitor at my school. He hadn't told me. He hadn't mentioned a word. He wore the khaki uniform, the one with the stitched name tag and rubber soles that squeak on linoleum. He was wiping down a table in the cafeteria when I saw him, and I laughed. Not out loud, no, that would have made it too real. But I laughed inside, a sharp, cold laugh, not the kind you enjoy, the kind that hurts and covers it with arrogance. I walked past him like he was invisible, like he wasn't my blood, like the man who raised me wasn't worthy of being seen. I thought I was protecting myself from shame, but what I didn't know was that he was protecting me from the truth. Chapter 2, The Cafeteria Floor. He didn't see me at first. His back was turned, his head slightly bent forward in concentration as he scrubbed a sticky patch on the floor beside the vending machines. The cafeteria was nearly empty, only a few early students on their phones, a teacher sipping coffee at a corner table. Outside, the sky was the kind of gray that made everything feel smaller, more fragile. I stood frozen by the doorway, backpack heavy on my shoulder, watching him work, watching my father push a mop back and forth in quiet, rhythmic motions, Watching the man who used to carry me on his shoulders now carry a plastic bucket filled with dirty water. I wanted to turn away, to walk out, to pretend it wasn't him, but I didn't. Instead, I watched him. He moved with precision, not laziness, like someone who had done this for a long time and took it seriously. He paused for a second, straightened his back, and wiped his forehead with the sleeve of his uniform shirt. Then he turned toward me. Our eyes met, and I swear in that brief second we were both stripped bare. He looked surprised, not embarrassed, just caught, like someone who had been trying to keep something hidden and had finally run out of corners to hide it in. I didn't say anything. I just turned and walked away. Later that day, I laughed with my friends in the hallway, louder than I needed to. I called a kid sneakers janitor shoes and got a cheap laugh out of it. I shoved my guilt down deep, buried it under sarcasm and smirks. But when I went home that night, everything was quieter. Dad was in the kitchen, still wearing his uniform shirt. He was stirring something on the stove, spaghetti probably. That's what he always made when he was tired. I dropped my backpack on the floor and walked past him without a word. He looked up and said, "Hey, sport, you okay?" I didn't answer. I just went to my room and closed the door. Later, I heard him knock gently, twice. "I left a plate for you on the counter," he said, "if you're hungry." I said nothing. I sat on my bed staring at the wall and hated him. Hated that he made me feel this way. Hated that he worked at my school. Hated that he didn't even tell me. Mostly I hated that I didn't understand why. The next morning, I skipped breakfast and walked to school early. I avoided the cafeteria, avoided the teacher's lounge hallway, avoided him, but I still saw him. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught glimpses, emptying trash in the art room, restocking toilet paper in the boys' bathroom, fixing a broken locker with an old wrench and quiet patience. No one seemed to look at him. Not really. To most people, he was part of the background, like the walls, or the windows, or the bell. That afternoon in history class, my teacher asked us to write an essay. Who's someone in your life that you admire and why? The room filled with whispers, kids talking about their moms, their basketball coaches, their favorite TikTok influencers. I stared at the blank paper. My pen didn't move. When I got home, Dad was on the phone with someone from the hospital billing office. I stood quietly in the hallway listening. "I can send half this Friday," he said. "The rest, maybe next month. She's due for another round next week, right?" "Yeah, I know, I'll make it work." His voice was low, steady, but worn. The way a fence post leans after too many storms but still refuses to fall. I tiptoed back to my room, my throat dry. He didn't know I'd heard, and I still didn't know what it meant. I just knew my little sister, Sarah, had been staying at Aunt May's for a long time, at least. That's what Dad always said when I asked why she hadn't come home yet. I didn't question it much. I was used to not getting answers. That night I finally ate the spaghetti he left on the stove. It was cold, but I didn't heat it up. It tasted like the floor of a school cafeteria. And for the first time in my life, I wondered how long it had been since my dad had a meal that wasn't leftovers. Chapter 3. The man nobody sees. There's a kind of loneliness that settles in when you realize the person you live with is a stranger. Not a stranger in the way that you don't know their name or their habits. No, those you know by heart. The way they stir their coffee 3 times before taking a sip. The way they always check the locks twice at night. The way they hum when they're anxious but don't know they're doing it. You know all that, but you don't know the why behind it, and that's the loneliest part. I started noticing things. Little things. The calluses on Dad's hands. The way he winced when he bent down to tie his boots. how his back curved just slightly more than it had a year ago. I noticed the stack of envelopes near the microwave, hospital logos, utility bills, pink slips that said final notice in bold red letters. He never mentioned them, just tucked them into a drawer when he thought I wasn't looking. He still packed my lunch every morning. Same old sandwich, apple, and a granola bar, sometimes a note. "Have a good day, champ. Proud of you. Let me know if you need anything." I used to crumple them up without reading. Now I save them in my backpack, not sure why. At school, I pretended everything was normal. I kept my head down. I avoided the hallways he might be in. But sometimes I'd catch sight of him, sweeping near the science wing, unclogging a sink in the art room. Teachers passed him with quick nods. Students passed him without noticing, and I started to realize something that knocked the wind out of me. He was invisible, not just to the world but to me. All these years, and I'd never really seen him. Not when he skipped dinner so I could have seconds. Not when he worked weekends to pay for my football cleats. Not when he missed sleep to pick up Sarah's prescriptions. One day in English class, Mr. Landers pulled up a quote on the projector. "The greatest tragedy is not the absence of love, but the absence of recognition." I don't know who said it, but I remember staring at that line for what felt like an hour. That night, I asked Dad how Sarah was doing. He was washing dishes, sleeves rolled up, forearms wet and red from the hot water. He paused for a moment, then said, "She's doing okay. Some days are better than others." I nodded. "When she coming home?" He turned back to the sink. "Soon," he said, and that was it. The truth was beginning to show around the edges. I could feel it, like a splinter you can't quite see but you know is there. Something was being kept from me, maybe out of protection, maybe out of pride, maybe both. On Friday, I stayed late after school for a club meeting. Most of the building was empty by the time I left. I took a shortcut through the janitor's hallway, the one no one uses unless they have to. That's when I saw it. My dad crouched on the floor, scrubbing gum off the underside of a desk. His knees were in a pair of foam pads. There was sweat on his neck and a fresh bleach stain on the side of his uniform shirt. He looked tired. But more than that, he looked small, like a man who had spent a lifetime shrinking himself for the sake of others. I don't know what came over me, but I just stood there, watching. And for the first time, I didn't feel embarrassed. I felt ashamed, not because of him, but because I'd let the world tell me that what he did wasn't enough. That janitors were invisible. That men who clean bathrooms can't be heroes. That someone like my dad, who worked his fingers raw to keep a roof over my head, deserved less respect than a man in a suit who didn't know my name. I didn't say anything to him that day, but I didn't look away either, and maybe that was the first step toward seeing. Chapter 4. The Announcement. It happened on a Tuesday. The kind of ordinary, dragging Tuesday where the clock seems to move slower than usual, and even the teachers look like they've had enough. I was sitting in homeroom, half awake, trying to finish a math worksheet I should have done the night before, when the intercom crackled to life. "Good morning, students. This is Principal Gardner with a quick announcement. Next Friday, we'll be hosting our annual Honor Apparent Assembly. This is a special event where students can nominate a parent or guardian who's made an impact in their lives. Teachers will hand out the forms today. We encourage you to take this seriously. Let's celebrate the people who have helped us become who we are." A few students groaned. One kid joked, "Can I nominate my Xbox?" The rest of us laughed, me included. But deep down my stomach turned. Honor a parent. I felt the words stick to the inside of my ribs. The teacher passed the forms down each row. A simple sheet of paper with lines for our names, our chosen parent's name, and a paragraph on why we were nominating them. I stared at mine for a long time. There were 2 blank spaces, one for a name, one for love, and I couldn't fill either in. I looked around the room. Some kids were already scribbling away with proud smiles, writing about moms who worked 2 jobs, dads who coached their little league teams, step-parents who stood by them through thick and thin. What was I supposed to write? That my father was the school janitor and I pretended he didn't exist. That the last real conversation we had was 3 weeks ago, and it ended with me slamming my bedroom door. That I still didn't understand why he kept Sarah's illness from me, or why he worked like a ghost, or why he seemed to carry every burden in silence. I shoved the form into my backpack. That afternoon I found him in the driveway checking the tire pressure on the truck. The sun had set, but he still hadn't eaten. There were grease smudges on his cheek and his sleeves were rolled up past his elbows. "Hey," I said, voice low. He looked up, surprised. "Hey." I held out the tire gauge he'd forgotten on the porch step. He took it, nodded, then hesitated like he wanted to say something but didn't know how, so I said it for him. "School's doing this thing next week," I muttered. "Honor a parent assembly thing." He blinked. "Oh, I haven't picked anyone yet." He gave a half smile, the kind that doesn't quite reach the eyes. "Well, I'm sure you'll think of someone." The words stung more than I expected. I wanted him to say, "I'd be honored if you picked me," or "I know we've had our rough patches, but I'd be proud to stand beside you." But he didn't. He just went back to the tires. I went inside and stood at the kitchen sink, staring at the pile of dishes. My reflection in the window looked tired, older, not because of time, but because of all the silence I was carrying. Upstairs, I pulled the nomination form from my bag again. That blank space stared at me like an accusation. I thought about writing his name, just his name, but I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I opened my drawer, pulled out a crumpled sandwich note he'd once left me. The words were faded, but I could still make them out. "You matter, always have, always will." And for the first time since I saw him with that mop and bucket, I wondered if he'd always seen me, even when I refused to see him. Chapter 5. The room at the end of the hall. There was a bedroom at the end of our hallway that no one opened anymore. It used to be hers, Sarah's. The walls were still pale yellow, the color Dad let her choose when she turned 7. She said it reminded her of sunshine and lemon drops. Her bed had white sheets with tiny purple stars, and a stuffed giraffe sat propped up in the corner. He had one button eye and a sewn-on patch on his neck where I tried to fix him once with my shaky hands and too much glue. The room had been quiet for months now. Too quiet. At first, I believed Dad when he said she was staying with Aunt May for a while. Something about needing more help during the week, something about school being closer, something about it being just temporary. But May lived 2 towns over and Sarah hated her cooking. She once called Aunt May's meatloaf a biological threat. It didn't add up, and yet I didn't ask. Not because I didn't care, but because sometimes it's easier to believe in half-truths than to face the whole of something painful. The truth had a way of lurking in corners in our house. It didn't knock or shout. It waited patient and still until we were tired enough or sad enough to finally look it in the eye. That night I stood outside Sarah's room. The door was closed as always, but the light was on underneath, barely a sliver, like a whisper. My hand hovered over the knob. I thought I heard a sound, a breath, a movement. But when I opened the door, it was just still. Everything was in its place. The giraffe, the bookshelf with worn-out fairy tales, the handmade bracelet I gave her on her 10th birthday still hanging from the bedpost. What wasn't there, what hadn't been there for months, was her. I sat on her bed, unsure why. The mattress barely shifted beneath me. The air smelled faintly like lavender shampoo and something else. Hospital, maybe. A sterile kind of absence. I noticed a picture frame on her desk. It was a photo of the three of us, Dad, Sarah, and me, taken at the county fair. Sarah had cotton candy on her face and a grin so wide it made her eyes squint. Dad was smiling too, one hand on each of our shoulders. And me, I looked younger, lighter, before things got quiet, before Dad started leaving earlier, before he came home smelling like bleach, before I pretended I didn't notice. I picked up the photo and stared at it for a long time. It felt like holding something alive and gone all at once. Downstairs, I heard the front door open. Dad was home. I stayed in her room, the light dim and the silence loud. Maybe I hoped he'd come looking for me. Maybe I hoped he'd sit down beside me and finally say what I needed to hear, that Sarah wasn't just staying with May, that things weren't fine, that he was scared too. But he didn't come up. Instead, I heard the clink of his keys on the kitchen counter, the creak of the fridge, and the soft groan of his chair at the dining table. The same routine, the same silence. I closed the door behind me gently. Back in my room, I sat at my desk and opened the nomination form again. It was still blank, but something in me had started to shift. There was a story behind the man I laughed at in the hallway, and if I was ever going to tell it, I had to start listening, really listening, not to the words he said, but to the ones he didn't. Chapter 6. Whose name do I write? By Thursday, the posters were everywhere. Printed in bright colors, taped to lockers, stapled to bulletin boards, even projected on the cafeteria TVs between announcements. Honor a parent, Friday, 6 p.m., nominate the hero in your life. Hero. That word scratched at me all day. It followed me down every hallway. It echoed behind every offhand joke my classmates made. Bet Derek's dad shows up in a Tesla again. My mom already wrote my speech for me. Do we get extra credit if they cry? The form was still folded in the front pocket of my backpack, the crease worn, edges soft like something handled too many times but never used. Mr. Landers asked for them at the end of English class. Just drop your nominations on my desk before you leave, he said casually, not looking up from his attendance sheet. Or let me know if you're still deciding. I didn't move. The rest of the class filtered out, papers fluttering as they landed on the corner of his desk. Laughter, footsteps, door swinging open, then silence. Just me and my blank form. I approached the desk slowly. Mr. Landers looked up. Need more time? I nodded. He didn't push. Sometimes the people we want to honor, they aren't easy to write about, he said gently. Doesn't mean they aren't worthy. I gave a small nod, eyes down, and left the room. In the hallway, I passed the counselor's office. On a whim, I paused at the door. Inside, through the glass, I saw a girl from my biology class crying. Her mom was beside her, hand on her back, whispering something I couldn't hear. The girl was clutching her nomination form like it meant something, like it cost her something to write. I walked away. That afternoon, I found Dad outside on the porch, patching up the old screen door. His hands were covered in flecks of wood glue, a screwdriver in his back pocket. "Hey," I said awkwardly. He looked up. "Hey, bud. You're always fixing stuff," I said without thinking. He shrugged, smiling slightly. "Someone has to." I watched him for a moment, then sat down on the top step. "You ever feel embarrassed?" I asked. He paused mid-hammer. "About what?" "I don't know, life. work, people looking at you like you're less. He leaned back, rubbed the back of his neck with one hand. His wedding ring was gone, taken off years ago, but I noticed the tan line still faintly there. People are gonna look at you however they want to, he said finally, but how they see you doesn't change who you are. I nodded, chewing on the inside of my cheek. And how do you see yourself? I asked, quieter. He didn't answer, not right away. Then softly, as someone trying his damned best. The nail he was holding slipped. He cursed under his breath and laughed, shaking his head. Not perfect, he added, holding up the bent nail, but showing up. That night I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, counting the shadows on the walls. I thought about the cafeteria, about my friends, about how it would feel standing on that stage, calling out the name of the man who scrubs the floors under their feet. I reached into my backpack and unfolded the form again, and for the first time I wrote his name. Thomas J. Bennett. The handwriting was shaky, but it was mine. Chapter 7, Janitor's Kid. They say silence is golden, but in high school, silence is usually just loud judgment with no soundtrack. It started the morning after I turned in the nomination form. I hadn't told anyone, not even my closest friends. I'd slipped the paper quietly onto Mr. Lander's desk and walked away without looking back. It felt like dropping a secret into a well, hoping it would echo back with something good. But by second period, I realized something had changed. Ryan, my best friend since middle school, nudged me during homeroom. "Hey," he whispered, grinning. "You're brave, man." I blinked. "What? Your nomination? It's all over the office." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean all over the office?" He leaned in. "The teachers are prepping the speeches for the event. I heard Mrs. Cole reading yours aloud to Mr. Fletcher. Said it was unconventional but honest." I tried to laugh it off, but something in my chest pulled tight. At lunch, it got worse. Kyle from the soccer team walked past my table, tray in hand, and said just loud enough for others to hear, "Hey, janitor's kid, you think your dad can clean up the gym after the ceremony too?" His friend snickered. I froze. Ryan looked at me, unsure if he should say something. I didn't respond. I didn't throw anything. I didn't storm out. I just sat there staring at my sandwich like it was going to save me. The room felt too bright, the air too thick. Later, I went to the library and pulled up the event program on the school website. They just uploaded the lineup. Each student's name, followed by their parent's name and the title of their speech. Most were predictable. My mother, my hero, Emily Tran. Coach Dad, Marcus Hill. Through my father's eyes, Daniel Wu, and then mine, the man who nobody notices, Leo Bennett. Beside it, parent-honored Thomas J. Bennett, custodial staff. There it was, public, plain, permanent. I sat in the computer lab a long time after the bell rang. The screen dimmed. I didn't move. I thought about deleting the submission, telling Mr. Landers I changed my mind, pretending it was a mistake, that I wrote the wrong name. I thought about the look on my dad's face if I did, and that scared me more than the teasing. That night he came home late. I was still at the kitchen table, supposedly doing homework but really just staring at the same math problem for an hour. He came in through the back door, moving slower than usual. His hands were smudged with black, his knees creaking like old wood. He smelled like cleaner and cold air. "You're up late," he said. "Yeah." He poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. For a second we stood there in silence. Then I said, "Do you think people look down on you?" He raised an eyebrow. "That's a strange question. Just answer it." He took a sip of water, then shrugged. "Sometimes," he said, "but not always, and not the people who matter." I looked at him. "You matter," I said before I could stop myself. His face softened, just slightly. "I try," he replied, voice low, and maybe that was enough. The next morning I walked into school with my head a little lower but my chest a little stronger, because I realized something. I could take the jokes, I could take the looks, but I wasn't going to erase his name. Not this time. Chapter 8. The Weight of Quiet Things. The night before the assembly I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with the covers pulled to my chin, staring at the cracks in the ceiling like they held answers I'd never asked for. Every now and then I'd hear the creak of the floorboards downstairs, the soft shuffle of my dad's steps as he moved through the house like a ghost who didn't want to disturb the living. At midnight I got up. I didn't know why. Maybe I needed to move. Maybe I needed proof that he was still here, that the man I had spent most of my teenage years ignoring hadn't simply faded into the walls. I found him at the dining table. The overhead light was dim. A cup of black coffee sat untouched beside a stack of opened bills, a worn legal pad, and a small manila envelope sealed with a single piece of tape. He didn't see me at first. He was reading something. His fingers moved slowly along the page as if the words hurt to touch. There were bags under his eyes, the kind that come from more than just tiredness. They came from carrying too much for too long. I stepped forward gently. He looked up. "Oh, hey," he said softly, almost embarrassed. "Did I wake you?" I shook my head. "Couldn't sleep." He nodded, folded the paper he'd been reading, and slipped it into the envelope. Then he smiled at me in that quiet way he did, like he was grateful for the company but didn't expect it. "You want some tea?" he asked. I nodded. We didn't speak for a while, just sat there, the kettle humming in the background, steam rising between us like a curtain that hadn't quite lifted. Then I said it. "Why didn't you tell me Sarah was sick?" The words hung in the air, heavier than I'd expected. He froze, fingers wrapped around the ceramic mug. I watched his jaw shift, his mouth open, then close again. When he finally spoke, his voice was rougher than usual. "I didn't want you to carry it. You think I wasn't already carrying something? I thought maybe if I took enough of it, you could be 17 for a little longer." I looked down at my hands, suddenly unsure what to do with them. "You said she was at Aunt May's." She was for a while, but then things got worse. The chemo started, she lost her hair, her energy, her smile, and I thought if you saw her like that, his voice broke, you'd never look at her the same. Tears stung behind my eyes before I even knew they were coming. "She's my sister," I whispered. "I should have been there." "I know," he said, "and maybe that was my mistake, but I've made a lot of those trying to be both mom and dad." The kettle clicked. He stood to pour the water. I stood too without thinking and wrapped my arms around him from behind. His shoulders stiffened, then slowly, like thawing ice, relaxed into the shape of someone who hadn't been held in a long time. "I saw you in the cafeteria that day," I said into his back, "with the mop." He didn't move. I laughed, not out loud, but inside, because I didn't understand, and I hated that I didn't. He turned then, gently, and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You don't have to carry that either," he said. "But I want to," I replied. That night I went back to Sarah's room. I turned on her little bedside lamp. The giraffe was still there, so I sat on the floor beside it, holding her favorite book in my lap, and for the first time in months I didn't feel alone. Chapter 9. The Assembly. The gym smelled like folding chairs and fresh wax. They'd cleaned the floors for the occasion. Rows of seats lined up in military precision. A banner stretched across the far wall in block letters. "Honor a Parent Night celebrating those who raise us." Spotlights aimed at the stage. Microphones tested. Names printed in the program. The band played something vaguely patriotic while students fidgeted in button-down shirts and dresses their parents had ironed the night before. I stood near the back, next to the other students waiting for their turn. I could hear the audience filling in, parents talking, toddlers laughing too loudly, someone sneezing in the echo of the bleachers. Dad sat in the far corner, alone. He looked small in the crowd like he always did. Faded jeans, that same blue button-up shirt he saved for special things. He held the program in his hands and folded it carefully as if creases could make something easier to hold. I hadn't told him what I was going to say, just that I'd nominated him. He hadn't asked what for, hadn't asked if he should prepare. He just nodded, said, "You don't have to do anything fancy," and left it at that. But I had to, because all my life he showed up for me in ways no one else ever did, and I never once told him that I noticed. Now I had 5 minutes and a microphone to do it. Emily Tran went first. She spoke about her mother working night shifts as a nurse, coming home just in time to pack lunches and braid her hair. Everyone clapped. Her mom cried quietly in the front row. Then Daniel Wu. Then Marcus Hill. Speech after speech, each a small love letter, beautifully written, polished, practiced. Some made the crowd laugh. Others earned standing ovations, and then it was me. "Next," said Principal Gardner, Leo Bennett, honoring Thomas Bennett. My feet moved before I knew they were moving. My name echoed in the microphone. The room, once busy with chatter and movement, settled into stillness. I climbed the 3 wooden steps to the stage, paper in hand, palms damp. I looked out over the audience. I saw kids I passed in the hallway every day, teachers who'd never learned my name, a couple of students already whispering into their phones, and in the far corner, Dad. He gave me a small nod, that quiet, humble nod of his, not a performance, not a request, just "I'm here." I took a breath and began. I didn't want to speak tonight. A few chuckles from the crowd, not because I don't have someone to honor, but because the truth I'm about to share doesn't look good on paper. I paused. My dad doesn't wear a suit to work. He doesn't have a corner office or a title with letters behind his name. He doesn't own a company. He doesn't sign paychecks. I looked down at the paper in my hand. It suddenly felt heavy. He mops the floors you walk on. He empties the trash cans you overfill. He cleans up after school events he isn't invited to. He works long after the last student has gone home. I heard a few murmurs, felt eyes shift. He's the janitor here, and for a long time I was ashamed of that. A pause. I didn't tell anyone, not because he asked me to keep it secret, but because I thought it made me look small. I looked up and searched for his face. He hadn't moved, he was listening. But what I didn't see, what I refused to see, was that every night he came home with aching knees and cracked hands, he was doing it for me, and for my little sister, Sarah. The room hushed. She's sick, has been for a while. The kind of sick that requires long hospital stays and bills that don't wait. He didn't tell me, he just worked, quietly, steadily, without asking for thanks. I felt the lump rising in my throat. My dad isn't a hero because of what he does. He's a hero because of who he is, because he gives everything and asks for nothing, because he taught me that love doesn't always look like gifts or big speeches. Sometimes it looks like staying up late to wash uniforms, or skipping meals so your kid can have seconds, or carrying shame that doesn't belong to you just to protect the person who caused it. The microphone was trembling in my hand now. I laughed at my dad once because I saw him holding a mop. What I didn't know is that mop paid for my sister's chemo. Silence, real silence, not the kind that judges, the kind that holds its breath. I looked down again. So if you're asking me to name the person who's made the biggest impact on my life, it's not even a question. I looked back up. It's the man in the back row. My father, Thomas Bennett. The janitor you didn't notice, but who kept this school running for 3 years straight. I stepped back from the mic. No music played, no one clapped right away. Then someone stood, then another, and then like a slow rising tide, the gym filled with applause. Dad didn't stand, didn't wave, he just smiled, and in that moment I didn't feel ashamed. I felt proud. Chapter 10. After the applause. When I stepped off the stage, my legs felt unsteady, like they didn't belong to me. Hands reached out, classmates, teachers, even strangers, offering pats on the shoulder, a quick good job, or just a look that said, I see you now. I nodded, but the sound in my ears was still the echo of my own voice. I searched for Dad. He hadn't moved from his seat, still in that far corner, still with the folded program in his hands, but his eyes were wet. He didn't clap for me, not like the others. He just sat there, looking at me as if he were trying to memorize my face. For once, I didn't look away. After the program ended, the crowd spilled into the hallway, parents with flowers, kids embarrassed by too much hugging, laughter, the scrape of folding chairs on the gym floor. I stood by the door, waiting. He walked toward me slowly, weaving through the crowd. He wasn't a tall man, not really, but in that moment he felt taller than anyone else in the room. When he reached me, he didn't say anything. He just pulled me into a hug. The kind of hug that holds years inside it, unspoken apologies, unacknowledged sacrifices, the weight of love carried too long in silence. I didn't deserve that, he whispered into my shoulder. Yes, you did, I said, my voice cracked. Every word. We drove home in quiet, not the old kind of quiet, the heavy, suffocating one. This was different, a quiet that felt like rest, like release. At a stoplight, he cleared his throat. Sarah would have liked that, he said softly. I turned to look at him. Then we should tell her. He nodded, eyes still on the road. The light turned green and we moved forward. But something in me knew this wasn't just the end of a school assembly. It was the beginning of finally seeing each other, father and son, for who we really were. Chapter 11, the hospital room. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and winter air. Dad walked a step ahead of me, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. He'd been here 100 times, maybe more. For me, it was the first. The elevator ride up was silent except for the low hum of fluorescent lights. My reflection stared back at me in the mirrored walls, tired, nervous, older somehow. When the doors opened, he led me down a hallway lined with pastel artwork and bulletin boards full of children's drawings. Rainbows, smiley faces, names signed in crayon, hope sketched in shaky lines. We stopped outside a door. He hesitated, his hand resting on the handle. Then he looked at me. You ready? I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. He pushed the door open. And there she was, Sarah. Her head was bare, her hair gone except for a few stubborn wisps at the edges. Her skin looked pale, almost translucent, with tiny purple bruises dotting her arms where the Roman IV had been placed. She was smaller than I remembered, like someone had taken the brightness of her body and folded it down into something fragile. But her eyes were still Sarah, wide, curious, bright enough to fill the room. Leo, she whispered, her voice scratchy. My throat tightened. Hey, Squirt, I said, forcing a smile. I sat down beside her bed, trying to act normal, trying not to let the shock show on my face. She reached for my hand with fingers that felt weightless. You didn't come before, she said. There was no blame in her voice, just fact. I know, I whispered back. I'm sorry. She smiled, small but real. It's okay, you're here now. I glanced at Dad. He stood in the corner watching us. He wasn't trying to hide the tears in his eyes anymore. I turned back to her. How are you feeling? She shrugged. Some days are good, some aren't. Today's okay. She squeezed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Did Dad tell you why he works so much?" I nodded. "He told me enough." She looked at me then, with a seriousness that felt too heavy for her small body. "Don't be mad at him," she said. "He thinks he has to carry everything, but sometimes he just needs someone to carry him too." The words landed in me like a stone dropping into water, sending ripples through every part of me. I tried to keep calm. I leaned forward, pressing my forehead gently against hers. "I'll carry him," I whispered. "And you too." When I pulled back, her eyes were closed, a soft smile still on her face. The monitor beside her beeped steadily, like a quiet heartbeat echoing through the room. Dad placed a hand on my shoulder. For once, he didn't look like a janitor. He didn't look like a man worn down by bills and late nights. He looked like a father, my father. And in that small, sterile hospital room, for the first time, I felt like his son. Chapter 12, Learning to Carry. After that hospital visit, I couldn't unsee things. The world hadn't changed, not really. The school still smelled like pencil shavings and cafeteria pizza. My friends still argued about sneakers and college applications. Teachers still droned about dates I would forget. But I had changed. Everywhere I looked, I noticed pieces of my father's life I had ignored. The bags under his eyes, the way his boots were worn thin at the soles, the faint wince he made when he bent to pick something up, and the quiet, always the quiet. One Saturday I followed him to work. He didn't ask me to. I just showed up at the school, backpack slung over one shoulder, and walked into the janitor's hall where he was unloading supplies. He looked up, surprised. "What are you doing here?" I shrugged. "Figured you could use some help." For a moment he just stared at me like he wasn't sure if I was serious. Then slowly he handed me a broom. "Start with the gym," he said. "Corners collect dust faster than you'd think." I swept. He mopped. The two of us moved quietly across the echo of an empty gym, the sound of bristles against wood filling the space between us. It wasn't glamorous. My hands blistered, my back ached. Sweat stuck my shirt to my skin. But when I looked up and saw him watching me, not with judgment but with something closer to relief, I kept going. Later in the cafeteria, I helped him stack chairs, wipe down tables sticky with dried soda. "Doesn't bother you?" I asked, scrubbing at a stain that refused to disappear. "What?" he said. "Doing all this, being invisible." He paused, leaning on his mop. "Work isn't about who sees it, it's about who needs it." I thought about that for a long time. That evening when we got home, I offered to make dinner. He laughed. "You cooking?" "I can boil pasta," I said defensively. He let me try. The pasta came out clumpy, the sauce too salty, but he ate every bite without complaint. Afterward, as I was scraping dishes into the sink, he came up behind me. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "I know," I replied, "but I want to." For the first time in years, he didn't argue. The next week, I found myself picking up little things without being asked. Taking out the trash before he got home. Checking the mailbox and sorting bills. Leaving sticky notes on the fridge with reminders. "Don't skip breakfast. Call the insurance office. Take 5 minutes to breathe." They weren't grand gestures, but I started to see how small things mattered. How they stacked up piece by piece until they became weight no one should have to carry alone. And every time he noticed, every time his eyes softened just a little, I felt like I was finally earning something I hadn't realized I'd lost. His trust. Not the kind built on being a child, but the kind built on becoming something closer to an equal. A son who wasn't just looking for love, but ready to give it back. Chapter 13, The Stage with His Name on It. The morning of the ceremony, the sky was clear in that painfully honest way. No clouds to soften the light, no gray to hide behind. It felt like the kind of day that didn't let you lie to yourself. Dad had ironed his shirt the night before. It was the same one he wore to Sarah's doctor appointments and the same one he wore to church on Christmas Eve, blue button-down with a soft fraying at the cuffs. He didn't own a tie, and I didn't ask him to wear one. He asked me once, half-jokingly, "You sure you want me up there?" And for the first time I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said, "I'm sure." He nodded. That was enough. When we arrived at the school, the gym had been transformed. Rows of metal chairs gleamed in the morning light pouring through the high windows. Banners hung from the rafters, honoring those who raise us. A small stage sat at the center, draped in navy cloth, with a podium and a microphone waiting like a truth you couldn't dodge. Students milled about with their parents, some in suits, some in floral dresses, some clutching cards or speeches on folded paper. There were hugs, proud selfies, and mothers fixing stray hairs before their child went on stage. I stood near the back, holding the crumpled note I'd rewritten 3 times. My palms were sweaty, my throat was dry. My stomach was doing the kind of flips that no pep talk could calm. Ryan walked by with his dad, an accountant, I think. He gave me a look, not mocking, just curious, maybe a little surprised. "Good luck, man," he said, and kept walking. Dad stood beside me, his hands tucked into his pockets, taking in the crowd like a man who was used to being in rooms but not part of them. He didn't fidget. He didn't shift. He didn't try to blend in. He just stood, like a tree, like something that knew how to survive. The ceremony began. The principal welcomed the crowd with the usual script, words about gratitude, sacrifice, community. Each student was called up one by one. They'd speak a few words about their parent, hand them a small flower, and walk back to their seat to a polite round of applause. Some kids made jokes. Some made people cry. Some made people do both. And then my name was called. Leo Bennett, honoring Thomas Bennett. I heard a few whispers ripple through the crowd. The janitor's son. I walked up to the podium, heart pounding. I could feel every pair of eyes on me, some warm, some cold, some unsure. The microphone squealed briefly, then settled into silence. I unfolded my note, but I didn't read it. I looked at my dad instead, and I spoke from memory. "My dad isn't the loudest man in the room," I began. In fact, for a long time, I don't think most people even noticed him. A pause. "He doesn't own a business. He doesn't wear a suit to work. He doesn't drop me off in a shiny car or sit in meetings with titles in front of his name." I glanced at him. He was standing now, still calm. "My dad wears a name tag. He carries a mop. He cleans the classrooms you leave behind, and for a long time I was ashamed of that." The words caught in my throat. I swallowed hard. I was ashamed because I thought worth was measured in money, because I thought success meant people knew your name, because I thought being invisible meant you weren't important. Another pause. The room was quiet now. But then I found out why he did it. My voice cracked. He did it to pay for my little sister's hospital bills. He did it so I could stay in this school, so I could play on the soccer team, so I could pretend everything was fine when it wasn't. My hands were shaking, but my voice didn't. He never asked me to thank him. He never complained. He never said no when I needed something. He just kept showing up every single day. I looked at him again. And today, I want everyone in this room to see the man I see. The man who raised me alone. The man who worked 2 jobs and still found time to ask me if I'd eaten dinner. I took a breath. My father is Thomas Bennett. He's a janitor. He's the reason I'm standing here, and he is the greatest man I've ever known." Silence. Then someone clapped, then another, and another, until the whole gym was standing. I stepped down from the stage and handed him the flower the school had given us. He looked at it, then at me. Then, for the first time in a long time, he pulled me into a full embrace. No half-pat, no quick side hug, just a full, firm, wordless "I see you too." He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His arms said it all. Chapter 14, The Man Beside Me. The applause followed us home that night. Not the sound itself that faded when the gym lights dimmed and the folding chairs scraped against the floor, but the feeling of it, the warmth, the recognition, the truth finally spoken out loud after years of silence. Dad drove with both hands on the wheel the same way he always did. The truck rattled at 45 miles an hour the way it always did, but something about him was different. Lighter, maybe, or taller, though he hadn't grown an inch. For the first time, he wasn't carrying the whole weight of his life in secret. And for the first time, I wasn't pretending I didn't notice. We didn't talk much on the way home. We didn't have to. The next morning, something strange happened at school. People looked at me. Not in the way they used to, not with smirks or whispers. They looked at me with respect, curiosity, maybe even admiration. Kyle, the soccer player who'd once called me Janitor's kid, walked past in the hallway. He didn't say anything, but he nodded, just a small nod, enough to feel like an apology. Teachers stopped me too. Mr. Landers pulled me aside after English and said, "That took guts." "Mrs. Cole left a note on my desk. Your words mattered more than you know." It felt strange, like I'd been wearing someone else's name all this time and now people were finally seeing mine. But the person who mattered most didn't treat me any differently at all. When Dad picked me up that afternoon, he asked the same question he always did. "How was your day?" "Good," I said. He smiled. "Good." That night after dinner, I found him sitting on the porch. The air was cool, the sky painted in streaks of pink and gold. He was holding the flower I'd given him at the ceremony, just holding it like it was the most fragile thing he owned. "You didn't have to do that," he said softly without looking at me. "Yes, I did," I replied. He sighed, rubbed the back of his neck. "I don't like attention." "I know," I said, "but you deserved it." He turned then, eyes glistening in the fading light. "I just never wanted you to feel ashamed of me." My chest tightened. I was ashamed, I admitted, but not of you, of myself, for not seeing you sooner. He nodded slowly, as if the words settled into him like stones finally sinking to the bottom of a river. Then he reached over, placed a hand on my shoulder, and said something I'll never forget. "You saw me tonight, that's enough." The world didn't change overnight. Bills still came. Sarah was still sick. Dad still woke up before dawn to work shifts that bent his back and tired his eyes. But something inside us had shifted. For the first time, we weren't moving parallel through the same house. We were walking side by side. And when I looked at him, really looked, I no longer saw the man who embarrassed me. I saw the man who raised me. And for the first time, I felt proud to stand beside him. Chapter 15. The Ripple Effect. News spreads fast in a small town. By Monday, people I'd never spoken to were stopping me in the hallways. A junior I barely knew pressed a sticky note into my hand. "Your dad's a hero, don't forget that." A teacher slipped a granola bar into my backpack with a smile, as if feeding me was some small way of honoring him too. But it wasn't just at school. At the grocery store, Mrs. Hall from the PTA approached Dad at the checkout line. She handed him a gift card and said, "For gas money, no questions asked." He tried to refuse, but she pushed it into his hand anyway. The pastor at the church we hadn't attended in years stopped by our porch one evening with a basket of casseroles. "For those nights when cooking feels like one task too many," he said. And then there was the fundraiser. It started with a group of students who set up a jar in the cafeteria labeled for Sarah. They scribbled hearts and smiley faces on the side, thinking maybe they'd collect a few spare dollars for snacks or flowers. But by the end of the week it was full of bills. Local businesses caught wind. A diner downtown promised to donate a percentage of sales for a weekend. A print shop offered to make shirts with the words Team Sarah across the front. Someone set up a GoFundMe page, and within days the donations doubled, then tripled. Dad didn't know what to do with it. He wasn't used to being on the receiving end of generosity. His whole life had been about giving quietly without asking for anything back. To suddenly be seen, to suddenly have people showing up for him, it made him uneasy. "They don't owe us this," he said one night, staring at the growing stack of envelopes on the table. "They don't," I replied, "but maybe that's what makes it matter." He looked at me and for once didn't argue. The first time Sarah saw the shirts, her eyes lit up. She traced the letters with her thin fingers and whispered, "They made these for me." I nodded, smiling. "Yeah, kiddo, for you." She wore hers to her next appointment. The nurses clapped when she walked in, and in that moment something shifted again. It wasn't just about bills and hospital rooms anymore. It was about community. About people coming together for someone most of them didn't even know. For my father, for my sister, for us. One evening, Dad and I sat on the porch, watching the sunset stain the sky orange. The neighborhood kids played basketball in the distance. The sound of their laughter carried through the air. Dad leaned back in his chair, exhaled slowly, and said, "I don't know how we'll ever repay them." "Maybe we don't have to," I said. He glanced at me. "Maybe it's not about paying back," I continued. "Maybe it's about carrying forward, doing for someone else what they did for us." He smiled then, small, tired, but real. "Maybe so," he said, and for the first time the future didn't feel like a weight pressing down on us. It felt like a door opening. Chapter 16, From Shame to Pride. Months passed, seasons shifted. The air grew warmer, and with it came a quiet sense of hope I hadn't felt in years. Sarah began to smile more often. Her cheeks filled out, her laughter returned in bursts that echoed down hospital hallways. Each day wasn't perfect, but each day was a gift. Dad still worked, but not the way he used to. He no longer hid in shadows, no longer carried the weight of the world in silence. The school, moved by his story, offered him reduced hours and a role that allowed him to train younger custodial staff. They wanted his steadiness, his quiet example. At first, he resisted. He wasn't used to being valued for more than just the sweat on his brow. But in time, he accepted, not because it was easier, but because it gave him something new. Dignity that others finally recognized, dignity that had always been there. And me. I learned to see. I no longer cringed at the sight of his uniform. I no longer avoided the hallways where his work echoed in the smell of bleach and polish. Instead, I carried my head higher, because I knew that love can't be measured in titles or paychecks. Love is measured in the calluses on a father's hands, in the sleepless nights he endures for his children, in the sacrifices he never announces. The boy who once laughed at his father for mopping floors had grown into a son who finally understood. There is no shame in honest work, and no title greater than Dad. And so, this chapter of my life closes not with regret, but with gratitude. Gratitude for the man who raised me. Gratitude for a sister who reminded me what it means to fight. Gratitude for the lessons hidden in the smallest, quietest corners of life. If you've stayed with me through this story, thank you. May you leave here remembering to honor the people who stand beside you in silence, who carry burdens you may never see. And may you hold close the truth I learned too late, but not too late to matter. Love is never invisible. A love letter, thank you for listening to this story. From our family to yours, I wish you health, peace, and the kind of happiness that comes from knowing you are loved. Take care of yourself and of each other.